start the session. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the LPEA ESG Club session, during which we're going to discuss the business case for gender-lens investing and go through the complexities of this investment thesis. So I'm Aissata Coulibaly from EY, and I am your host as co-chair of the LPEA ESG Club. And I'm delighted to welcome you to a conversation today with Hedda Pahlson-Moller, founder and CEO of Tiime.org, which is a social impact catalyst. So we'll be happy to take a few questions after our conversation. So definitely feel free to post them using the chat functionality. So Hedda, first of all, welcome. Among many other things, Hedda, you are a private investor and advisor on issues relating to sustainable development, responsible finance, and diversity management. So you are also a thought leader on the gender lens investing space. So I'm very thrilled to have this conversation with you, Hedda, because as part of our activity within the ESG Club, we love to bring to our members and the LPEA community at large the latest in the impact investing and broader investing space. So let's start with the beginning. I think you'll probably agree with me that there is increasingly a lot of pressure to sort to have a stand and make commitment around our long-term value creation, and environmental, social, and governance considerations are very strong drivers for that. And I mean, when you look at the massive transfer of wealth occurring from boomers to millennials who have very strong ESG expectations, you kind of definitely have a feeling as a GP about where the money is going if you want to look for LPs. And you can also develop a strong conviction about the fact that you have to treat the shift from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism very seriously if you want to get your share of that money. And if you consider that women make up about roughly half of the world population, according to the World Bank, and that gender equality is at the heart of the 2030 agenda for sustainable development, and you consider that this topic was also on the agenda of the last 2020 G20 summit that took place in Saudi Arabia, perhaps that we can start by exploring a little bit your view on this and touch on your thoughts and how you're going to present basically the gender lens investing thesis in this context.
Yeah, my pleasure. Oh, I've got a little bit of background noise. Didn't have that before when we were testing. Let's see if it stabilizes. Okay, so Aissata, thanks so much for inviting me. I think this is a conversation you and I happily have offline, but we're going to do it now with a bit of an audience. And it's not just, from a personal passion or an interest, but from an investor perspective. And we're looking at this systematically and systemically. And I think it should be interesting for investors to understand what kind of capital is mobilizing, what the need and the opportunities are. So I've been musing on some thoughts to share about the language around it, because I think people are a bit saturated on the gender topic. Again, anything that issues a sense of guilt or distress, people want to push out of the way, and we really have to get into the mind of saying we got a problem, we're going to address it, and it's going to become a wonderful opportunity for everybody. But that's the mindset shift, and we've got a lot of behavioral change to get there. But if we start with identifying the issue, you talked about the SDGs, and people are becoming more familiar with the SDGs, and they know that there's one, which happens to be number 5, which is dedicated to gender equity. It's obviously mirrored in number 10, which is inequalities. But as we're talking about half of society, as you said, it stands alone as its own. And at the base, it's a human rights issue. It's clearly a human rights issue, but there's a simple economic argument of squandered human capital as well. So maybe I'm gonna throw out a little bit of data as we go through these discussions, which might help people understand the business case and what we're talking about. And I'm delighted to say that my colleague Cécile Séverin is logged in and on the chat room, so she might even capture some of the references I make for those of you that want to kind of do a little bit of your own research. But let's start with McKinsey's Power of Parity report that a lot of people are familiar with, that estimated that gross domestic product would be $12 trillion higher if gender inequality was addressed. So you've got a need, you got an opportunity there. And you work with a basic premise that women and girls represent half of the world's population and thereby half of its potential. But inequality persists and stagnates social progress. But even with all the awareness, women continue to be underrepresented at political and economic leadership. And across the globe, women and girls perform disproportionate share of unpaid domestic work. And let's not even begin talking about healthcare access and gender-based violence. Those are other big issues. But in terms of investment strategies for this community, the domain of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is very closely related to ESG. And there's a correlation in the rating.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fundamentally a power dynamics issue. It's power dynamics, and that's a really important element to understand, but very complicated to address. And I was thinking about some of the topics that we've discussed regarding where women and girls need access to education and healthcare, and access to finance is also a very, very critical point to get to where we need to go. And the World Bank tells us there's $320 billion funding gap between women entrepreneurs seeking capital and what's actually reaching them. So you have an undervalued asset. You have, depressing data and statistics from the venture capital world of 2.2% going to women entrepreneurs, and women of color, 0.02, 0.2, something incredibly low. But let's just nail the definitions of gender lens investing, which we actually call gender smart investing. That's the language we tend to use, gender smart investing. You can either invest in solutions to gender-based issues, like products and solutions that are designed for women and girls, healthcare, education, or adapting existing tools and services, or you work on your investment and work on your investment process. How are you looking at your investments across the value chain on, not just the board or leadership level, but at, across supply chain? And is your investment team representing the diversity? And I'm just going to share one last thought, and I know I'm going on too much, but I do love the topic, and that's about COVID making the situation a lot worse. Extreme poverty, which has been going down since the 70s, has, as you guys probably saw in the Economist article, has for the first time started going back up thanks to our pandemic, and 70% of the world's poor are women. And COVID is disproportionately affecting women in terms of the workforce because of they're in the care services and culture. Domestic chores are increasing, and the burden for women and gender-based violence is exploding. So again, it's a humanitarian, a human element, but there's a business and economic element as well. And we're trying to put both together.
Well,
Sorry,
thanks,
Aissata.
yeah, no worries. We are both passionate about the topic because there is a real business case there. And I think what you just shared is pretty helpful in terms of setting the scene and the backdrop of our conversation. And this is pretty clear. But, let's face it, I think there is a bunch of misconceptions, flying around gender smart investing. As you say, people often think that gender smart investing is trivial, that it's about crunching numbers to figure out the number of females, CEO and board members in a company or on an industry. So my question to you, Hedda, is pretty clear. I mean, is gender smart investing small and not backed by fact and only about women? Or is it pretty much more inclusive? And what are the facts that are concretely shifting out these biases? So if you can give us a little bit of flavor of concrete business case and the type of gender lenses you personally consider as an investor, Hedda, that would be pretty helpful.
Thanks, Aissata. It's a good question. Even if you understand it yourself, I think we have to keep asking and being clear on our language and taxonomy because it helps.
Absolutely.
And it's definitely not small or soft or pink. And pink used to be a boy's color back in the day. So anyway, it does impact the lives of men and boys as much. I mean, they're both part of being the victims of the unbalance as well as a critical part of the solution. So let's talk about concrete numbers because there's endless reports that we can share on the business case, both the needs and the benefits of addressing gender equality. We have a great website that has about 650 reports, and we wish we didn't have to talk about the business case, that we could just be working on implementation, but we realize we have to keep sharing information until it kind of sinks in. About the McKinsey report I mentioned earlier, the Power to Parity report. US SIF, if we talk about money that's mobilizing, we're investors. We like to understand what trends are and where capital is moving. US SIF produced a report that estimated gender lens investing being incorporated into investment decisions at about $800 billion US. 800 billion. This is a public domain report that says that's how many times questions about gender come up in the investment process. We have a more bottom-up research done on actual more explicit gender lenses, which I'll tell you about in a second, where we've calculated that both public and private equity, including gender bonds, is about 9 billion. It's a bit of a distance, but again, intentionality to put gender into investment processes vis-a-vis products and solutions that are really already kind of working on gender lenses. And the lenses include founder, ownership, leadership, women workplace equity, value chain, products and services. Are the products and services designed for women and girls and not just for men and boys? Are you addressing HR or social justice issues? And also women as investors. That's also a domain that we push a lot. So as investors in this community, you're going to be interested in the data that proves that diversity leads to better performance. We're not just talking about women, it's diversity fundamentally. You have Morningstar that shows the performance of 10 gender-based focused funds, 7 of them outperforming top quartile of the categories. You have MSCI has done a similar study. Calvert, looking at 156 companies in their portfolio over 11 years, concluding that gender smart investing results in higher performance. They have 20% higher sales in companies with women in leadership, 12 times return on assets. So in sum, the business case for gender smart investing is enhanced portfolio performance. That includes new and tailored products, talent acquisition, retention, improved decision making. 2, mitigating risks. Most of us know that that's a very important part of our jobs, and that can be for product failure or attrition. And 3rd is access to capital. If I'm telling you that there's $9 billion that are already being mobilized with a gender smart investing requirement, that's access to capital if you can also implement gender lenses in your own work. I'll leave you with that, and hopefully that was summarized enough in terms of lenses and numbers.
Absolutely, Hedda, and those are pretty impressive figures. And what I find as well truly exciting about the different lenses you just mentioned is that gender smart investing empower everyone to have a choice when coming to that space. And what I'm also understanding from what you just say, Hedda, is that gender smart investing is definitely far from trivial. Looking at the figures you just kind of like share with us, it is a kind of like holistic approach and certainly not a limitation triggering the exclusion of men, for instance. So it doesn't only focuses on the investment target, but it also includes the entire investment process and the surrounding economic and social environment. So I really see that from what I'm understanding from you, Hedda, as a mind opener and as a kind of like game changer which carries significant returns opportunities. So you have gathered some great experience and first-hand exposure to gender smart investing as an impact catalyst. So let's just pretend that I am a fund manager or a portfolio company CEO, and that I am a bit hesitant. I'm interested in ESG. I care very strongly about environmental factors. Perhaps I'm high risk on some governance factors along those lines, but I'm really interested in gender, but I just don't know how to take the leap. So what will you recommend, and what are the actions you think I should take to start with this journey and get the ball rolling? So if you could give our audience a couple of examples about how that might play in real world scenarios, and about how to make genderless investing sticky when it comes to executing related business strategy, that would be fantastic.
Thanks for the question. I'm going to begin by admitting that for me, the journey was long and difficult to put a gender lens, and also I considered myself gender blind for a long time, and that didn't serve me or my investments or my business activities. I've become what we call gender positive, and the work we do at Tiime, which is helping people start impact investing and putting sustainability and non-financial risks and opportunity mindset in their investing work, is very similar to the gender lens. Again, you're putting on a pair of glasses and you're saying, oh my, this is a problem and an opportunity that I think we need to and should and must address. And when I work with people to try to get their impact narrative and their theory of change, it's the same story here. You really ideally need to understand both the social imperative, but the economic business opportunity both together. And once you understand the problem, you can tackle it, not as lip service, but as a genuine opportunity to grow and develop, capture new business and performance. but it requires a behavioral change, and not just token actions. And remember, it's not, as you say, it's not just about women. It's first of all, it's a gender spectrum. It's a spectrum we're talking about, in diversity in all its formats. Putting women on boards does not solve the rest of the issues. These are pieces of the puzzle, and it helps us understand that power and opportunity is in the diversity of it. And if you can't address women, which is half of society, you're going to have a lot of trouble leveraging the other minority groups. So we also need to get at the table. Again, being gender blind does not serve you, society, or your organization. Being gender positive is the way you need to look at things. So in terms of kind of concrete steps that I would recommend for the LPEA community, one, start with recognizing your unconscious biases, and being honest with yourself. I had to change my whole mindset about service providers and my investees, of how I looked with my pre-assumptions about how women and men function differently. And I needed to kind of crack my own thoughts on that. The second thing is get familiar with the research and the business case, and get best practice for inspiration, and move into implementation. We really shouldn't be talking about the why anymore. We should be talking about the how. Third, you were asking me before I sat that to share some sources, and Cecilia's on, so hopefully she can give you guys these links. But we have the Gender Equality Mainstreaming Framework, GEM, which is a practical manual and toolkit for assessing gender equality and identifying, implementing, and measuring gender equality strategies within companies. Fantastic toolkit, and hot off the press for any of you that are starting to kind of move in this direction. From the International Finance Corporation, IFC, you may have heard of. They've created a private equity and value creation's fund manager's guide to gender smart investing. It's a practical step-by-step guide and roadmap for fund managers on how to strengthen gender diversity within their firms and incorporate gender focus into investment operations. So it's there. All this stuff is out there, ready to use, and you just have to, again, make that personal decision that this is a priority and make those shifts. It's the same thing for like all the ESG changes. You have to say, this is a priority, take the steps you need to start implementing it.
That's a really, really good point. And clearly, Hedda, starting with cracking your own thoughts and looking at your own biases is really a good starting point for the GPs and other investors interested in that space. So just shifting gears slightly here and trying to connecting the dots with returns. How does success look like concretely in that space? I mean, I'm wondering if you can kind of like expand on that a little bit.
In terms of success, I think that success, of course, is defined quite personally for individuals. Some people, again, are coming at it from the social element and the social justice issue for inequalities. And we work with everything from philanthropists to venture philanthropists to impact investors and traditional finance. So depending on what their metrics are, what they're trying to address in terms of priorities, you have to design both the strategies, the solutions, and the metrics to achieve that, based upon what success is. For myself and my portfolio management, I wanted to have a gender lens across all my asset classes. So I tried to ask myself some questions, and that doesn't just mean having an ETF that has a public equities gender lens on board positions, but also looking at my investment process, my due diligence on certainly my private equity and venture capital work. And just evolving that and making sure that I can say that I've either asked the right questions before I invested, or I'm part of designing a solution with the investee to move them in the right direction. The number of times I've invested in a fund or a project, a company, and that I've been part of joining them to, whether sitting on their advisory board or sourcing people to join their executive team or somewhere else in their investment teams. You can be part of the solution. That's the beauty of private equity. We have that opportunity to help them move in their journey. And that is really an exciting and part of my personal success, when I can help them identify the gaps and start moving in the direction of leveraging diversity.
I fully agree, Hedda. And if I kind of like quickly pivot back to what you were saying earlier when we were setting the scene and the backdrop of our conversation, what are, from your investor perspective, the challenges that are facing this space and that are prohibiting it from growing much more quickly because the figures are there, it's factual, there is a strong business case. And after that, I mean, if you can kind of like let me know if you are looking forward through the next 5 to 10 years, I would say, can you kind of like paint a vision of the evolution of the gender smart space?
Okay, so challenges. I think I can probably sum up some of the things I've already said. Business as usual is our number one challenge. Unconscious biases, stereotypes, and general discomfort with change. We don't like it. I mean, the amount of people that I hear calling up and complaining about ESG requirements that are burdening them and their administration, their bureaucracy, etc. We don't like changing, and behavioral change is hard. And sometimes we have to, use carrots and sticks to get through that change. And in the end, it's going to benefit all of us. So I think the business case will speak for itself. And the ESG and SDG movement, you love acronyms, so environmental social governments and the societal development goals, sustainable development goals from the UN, they're going to provide additional fuel for the fire. And as you mentioned earlier, Aissata, the fact that women are coming into a lot of wealth right now is going to drive big changes. How they are banking, how they are investing, the questions they ask. And there's some really wonderful projects and studies that are being done on how women are investing differently. And if anybody is fundraising out there, you better understand the differences in how men and women are asking questions and what they're expecting in order to do so properly. But maybe a kind of concrete thing for people to think about, because it's intimidating when you have to suggest building a new strategy, particularly something that does make people feel uncomfortable, because as we said earlier, there's some saturation on the gender issue. Whenever you make people feel guilty about societal issues or environmental issues, the mental block of saying, I don't even want to hear about it, it's get out of my face. We have to start helping people make incremental changes, because what we find with, in general, sustainability practices, which includes diversity, is that when you make these small changes, it becomes a snowball effect. Okay, once you force yourself to change some of the faces in your executive and board teams, you'll find that you'll get used to having other faces and perspectives and working in a more collaborative way, and that it kind of works through the organization. So I think it's going to happen quite quickly, partially regulations and some of that the sticks, but there's a lot of the opportunity in the business case, and the ones that capture it earlier will be outperforming, and I think we'll see this change very, very quickly.
So that's a really great input, Hedda. Thank you so very much for that. It's a very an exciting space. And then ultimately, the key takeaway here is that gender smart investing is definitely not about limitation and excluding males from the long-term value equation and from the triple bottom line narrative. It empowers everyone to have a voice. It goes across all sectors. It is not investing for women. It is investing for smart investors. And it's about moving from counting women to valuing women. And I think gender smart investing skeptics need only to look at the fact to be convinced to act. So Hedda, again, thank you so very much for spending the time with us today. Thank you very much, Cecile, for all the information you kind of like put on the chat. That brings us to the end of our conversation, because the main event will start again in a couple of minutes at 2 p.m. sharp. And I really appreciate you, Hedda, joining us and sharing your insight and experience into the reality and trends that will be shaping the future of gender smart investing. So to our audience, thank you so very much for having listened and for having joined our session. And I really hope that you enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so very much, Hedda and Cecile, and speak soon.
Thank you.
Bye.